The millionaire lived blind not only in sight, but to the truth surrounding him. It took a mute, poor girl to make him see what no one had ever dared to show. What began with a single lit candle turned into scandal, public judgment, and the threat of losing everything he owned. But in the end, he realized the greatest danger was never blindness. It was living without love, without a voice, and without light. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, Anthony Rivers had a meticulously planned life. At 45, he owned one of the largest technology companies in the United States, headquartered in New York City. His empire, built with iron determination, was worth billions. But there was one detail that set him apart from other magnates. Anthony had been completely blind since birth. What many saw as a limitation, he transformed into an advantage. He developed a prodigious memory and an intuition for business that compensated for his lack of sight. His mansion in Greenwich Village was a monument to assistive technology, with automated systems that responded to his voice commands and sensors that guided him through the rooms with millimeter precision. On an April morning, as the city awoke under a fine drizzle, Anthony prepared for another day of meetings. He wore the impeccable suit chosen by his personal assistant, Denise, who had organized his life for over a decade. "Traffic is terrible today, Mr. Rivers," warned Paul, his driver and bodyguard. "Fifth Avenue is congested because of a cultural event. Can we take an alternative route?" Anthony asked, adjusting his wristwatch that announced the time in a low voice when pressed. "I'll try Broadway, but it doesn't look promising either." Anthony nodded, leaning back in the armored sedan's rear seat. The sounds of the city were his mental map: impatient honks, street vendors, the constant hum that formed New York City's chaotic symphony. Over the years, he had learned to interpret every sonic nuance, creating mental images of the world he had never seen. The car stopped at an intersection in Midtown Manhattan. Anthony noticed agitated voices nearby, indicating some confusion. He slightly lowered the window to better understand what was happening. "A group of children from some shelter doing a street performance," Paul explained. "They seem to be asking for donations." Anthony didn't respond. Something in that moment caught his attention, a soft flute melody that stood out from the ambient noise. There was something hypnotic in those notes, a purity that deeply intrigued him. "Paul, I want to get out." "Sir, we're in the middle of traffic and you're meeting." "Just a minute," he insisted, already fumbling for the door handle. Paul quickly got out to help him. The moment Anthony stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling the fine drizzle on his face, the urban chaos seemed to intensify. Horns blared louder. A driver shouted impatient expletives, brakes screeched. Then everything happened quickly. Anthony felt a strong push on his chest, making him step back a few paces. A sharp metallic sound followed by screams. A motorcycle had veered onto the sidewalk out of control, passing exactly where he had been seconds before. "My God, Mr. Rivers, are you all right?" Paul approached alarmed. Anthony, still trying to process what had happened, realized someone was holding his sleeve tightly. Small hands, probably a child's. "Who's there?" he asked, extending his fingers until they touched what felt like a delicate shoulder. "It's one of the children from the shelter, sir," Paul explained. "It looks like she pulled you before the motorcycle hit you." People began to gather around. Anthony heard comments about how close it had been, how quickly the girl had acted, how he could have suffered a serious accident. "What's your name?" Anthony asked, bending down towards where the child's hurried breathing came from. Silence. "She doesn't speak, sir," a female voice said as she approached. "Sophia has been mute since she arrived at our shelter." "Sophia," Anthony repeated, feeling the strangeness of the moment. "You saved my life, Sophia, thank you." More silence. Then something unexpected happened. Anthony felt a warmth near his face. Not body heat, but something different, like a gentle energy source. A characteristic scent of paraffin and honey reached his nostrils. "She lit a candle," the woman explained. "It's something she always carries. Sophia has a fixation on candles. She believes they illuminate more than the environment." At that moment, something extraordinary occurred. For the first time in his entire life, Anthony perceived a variation in the darkness that had accompanied him since birth. It wasn't exactly sight, but a disturbance in the constant blackness, a yellowish, flickering blur, almost imperceptible. Anthony gasped, recoiling instinctively. His hands trembled. His heart pounded in his chest. "Whoa, sir." Paul touched his shoulder. "Are you feeling unwell?" "The candle," Anthony murmured, reaching out towards what he now knew was a small flame. "And I can perceive something." A murmur of disbelief ran through those present. Anthony, still in shock, tried to explain the inexplicable. "It's like a patch of color in the darkness. I've never felt this before." The shelter coordinator, who introduced herself as Mary Turner, observed the scene with evident skepticism in her voice. "Mr. Rivers, perhaps the shock of the near accident." "It's not that," he insisted, still fascinated by the phenomenon. "Sophia, please keep the candle here." The girl seemed to understand the importance of the moment. Anthony felt the warmth move slightly in front of him, and with it, the luminous blur shifted in his perception. "Impossible," he murmured to himself. Paul, concerned about his boss's state and aware of the crowd forming, suggested they return to the vehicle. By then, curious onlookers were already filming the scene with their cell phones. "Wait," Anthony asked, still focused on the phenomenon. He turned to where he imagined Mary was standing. "The shelter where Sophia lives, I want to visit it. Today." "Well, we have protocols for visits, sir. You'd need to schedule, and I'll make a substantial donation." "New computers, school supplies, whatever is needed," Anthony interrupted, already regaining his usual composure. "But I need to talk more about Sophia." He sensed Mary's hesitation, the calculating silence. Finally, she agreed. "We're at 142 Barron Street. You can visit us after 2 in the afternoon." Anthony nodded, thanking her. When Sophia released his sleeve, the small luminosity he had experienced extinguished completely. The darkness returned, as absolute as it had always been, but something had changed forever. Back in the car, Anthony remained silent for long minutes, trying to process what had happened. "Cancel my engagements for today," he finally instructed. "Call Dr. Miller and schedule an emergency appointment. And find out everything you can about the Dawnlight Shelter and a girl named Sophia." "Did you really see something?" Paul asked, unable to hide his astonishment. Anthony touched his own eyelids, as if searching for a physical explanation for the phenomenon. "I can't explain it, Paul." It was as if, for an instant, the darkness had an end. Dr. Robert Miller's office at Albert Einstein Hospital was silent when Anthony arrived. A renowned neurologist, Miller had monitored his health for over 20 years, knowing every detail of his condition. Anthony's blindness was the result of a congenital malformation of the optic nerve, considered irreversible by all specialists consulted throughout his life. "You're telling me you perceived light?" the doctor asked, his voice betraying professional skepticism. "Anthony, in 4 decades, your exams have never shown any activity in the visual areas of the cortex." "I know how it sounds, Robert," Anthony replied, sitting rigidly in the chair. "But it happened. It was brief and imprecise, but it was there. A disturbance in the darkness, something yellowish that moved as the candle moved." The doctor sighed, typing notes into his computer. "I'll order a complete battery of tests, including a functional MRI. Perhaps we're facing a phenomenon of synesthesia, or a form of visual hallucination induced by stress." "It wasn't a hallucination," Anthony insisted, crossing his hands over his cane. "And I'm not under stress. My company has never been more prosperous. My health is perfect. Except for the fact that you believe you saw for the first time at 45, the doctor pondered. "We need to investigate calmly. In the meantime, I recommend you keep this confidential. The media would love to turn your case into a spectacle." 3 hours later, Anthony had undergone CT scans, electroencephalograms, and an extensive neurological evaluation. The preliminary results baffled the medical team. There was indeed a small activation in areas of the visual cortex that, until then, had remained completely dormant. "It's fascinating," commented Dr. Lucy Evans. A neuroscientist called for consultation. "Theoretically, these areas should have been reprogrammed for other functions, considering they were never visually stimulated." "What does that mean in practice?" Anthony asked, impatient. "It means something activated circuits that shouldn't be functional," she explained. "But we need to be realistic. We're talking about a minimal, almost residual response. This doesn't represent vision in the conventional sense." Anthony smiled discreetly. "Doctor, For someone who has lived in complete darkness for 45 years, any spark of light is a revolution. Leaving the hospital with the promise of more detailed results in the following days, Anthony headed to the Dawnlight Shelter. Situated in a renovated townhouse in Midtown, the institution housed about 30 vulnerable children. As he got out of the car, Anthony perceived the environment in his own way. Children's voices, distant laughter, the smell of food being prepared. Mary came to greet him, her voice now more receptive after confirming he was indeed the famous businessman. "Sophia is in the music room," she informed him, guiding him through the corridors. "She hasn't left there since she returned from the outing. Does she play an instrument?" Anthony asked, following the sound of her footsteps. "Flute, she taught herself watching videos. She has a natural gift for music, despite never having uttered a word." Upon entering the small room, Anthony immediately recognized the melody. It was the same one he had heard at the intersection, the one that had made him get out of the car. There was something primal and magnetic in those notes, as if they told a story without words. "Sophia, look who came to visit you," Mary announced. The music stopped. Anthony felt a light presence approach, the air gently shifting. "Hello, Sophia," he greeted, bending down slightly. "Do you remember me? From the intersection earlier today?" A soft touch on his hand was the answer. Then again that sensation. Warmth near his face, the characteristic smell of paraffin. The candle. And with it, the same disturbance in the darkness, a yellowish blur appearing in his field of non-vision. Anthony swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure in front of Mary. "Does she always do this with visitors?" he asked casually. "No," the coordinator replied, intrigued. "In fact, Sophia usually keeps her distance from strangers. But it's the first time I've seen her so at ease with someone she just met." At that moment, Anthony made a decision that would change his life forever. "I'd like to know more about her story. How she got here, if there are family records." Mary hesitated but led him to her office. The files revealed a fragmented story. Sophia had been found 3 years earlier, approximately 6 years old, wandering alone near the Port Authority bus terminal. She carried no documents, only a small backpack with clothes and, curiously, several handmade candles. She never spoke. Anthony asked, running his fingers over the braille documents Mary had provided. Not a word. Doctors found no physical problems with her vocal cords. They suspect selective mutism caused by trauma. We've tried various treatments, but she communicates only through gestures and occasionally through drawings. Drawings. Mary opened a folder. They're always the same themes: candles, lights, sometimes stylized human figures. "Can I take her for an outing tomorrow?" Anthony asked suddenly. "Perhaps to the park, with your supervision, of course." The coordinator seemed surprised. "Mr. Rivers, I understand your interest and I'm grateful for the donation you promised, but there are strict protocols for our children's outings, especially with people they've just met." "I understand," he replied, maintaining a calm tone. "How about a supervised visit here, then? I can bring some people who work with me on social projects. Perhaps we can develop something specific for the shelter." This approach seemed more acceptable to Mary, who scheduled a new visit for the following day. Upon returning home, Anthony was restless. For the first time in decades, he felt disconnected from his meticulous routine. He dismissed the formal dinner prepared by his housekeeper and retired to his office, where he spent hours dictating notes to his automated system, researching rare cases of visual recovery, and most importantly, trying to understand what connected him to that silent girl. At 3 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Dr. Miller. "Anthony, I'm sorry about the hour, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow. The final MRI results are in and—" "Well, it's extraordinary. What did you find?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The activity in your visual cortex isn't random. It follows a rhythmic pattern that perfectly coincides with the oscillation frequency of a candle flame, as if your brain is synchronizing with it." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "We don't know yet. But I suggest we start a deeper investigation. I'd like to bring in international specialists for your case, with your permission." Anthony hesitated. The idea of becoming a research subject didn't appeal to him, but the possibility of understanding what was happening and perhaps expanding that minimal perception of light was too tempting to refuse. "Before that," he finally said, "I need your help with another matter. There's a child involved in this story, the girl holding the candle. I want to know if there's any physiological connection between us, something that explains why this happened specifically in her presence. Are you suggesting testing the child? The doctor asked cautiously. I'm suggesting that perhaps we're facing something that transcends our current understanding of neurology, Robert. And to understand it completely, we need to consider all elements involved. After hanging up, Anthony sat in the darkness of his room. For the first time, darkness didn't seem like a permanent state, but a condition that could, however minimally, be altered. The idea left him simultaneously hopeful and apprehensive. The next day, upon returning to the shelter, Anthony brought with him not only his social foundation team, but also a plan that was beginning to take shape in his mind. A plan that would change not only his life, but also the destiny of a little girl who, without uttering a single word, had illuminated his eternal darkness with the simple flame of a candle. The following weeks passed at an accelerated pace for Anthony. His routine, once as predictable as a Swiss watch, now revolved around two main axes: the medical studies on his condition and regular visits to the Dawnlight shelter. At the hospital, he had become the center of an unprecedented study. A multidisciplinary team, including neurologists, ophthalmologists, and even a physicist specializing in sensory perception, tried to understand the phenomenon. Daily exams, tests of response to different light stimuli, endless questioning sessions. Anthony submitted to everything with unusual patience for someone accustomed to controlling all situations. The pattern of brain activation is consistent, explained Dr. Lucy during a team meeting. When exposed to the light of specific candles, previously inactive areas of the visual cortex show a response. It's minimal but undeniable. What about other light sources? One of the researchers asked. Nothing. Neither lamps nor flashlights nor natural sunlight. Only candles, and even then not all of them. What's the difference? Anthony asked, increasingly intrigued. Paraffin composition, perhaps? Flame oscillation frequency? We are investigating all variables, but there's something peculiar about the candles that girl produces. They contain a mixture of waxes and essences that doesn't match any known commercial standard. At the shelter, meanwhile, Anthony had established a constant presence. What began as formal visits gradually transformed into a routine of entire afternoons spent with Sophia. He brought musical instruments, Braille books to share stories, and, of course, many candles, always bought from the most specialized shops he could find. Sophia, in turn, became more at ease in his company each day. Although she remained silent, her non-verbal communication flourished. They developed their own system of hand touches, where each press of her small fingers had a specific meaning. On one particularly significant afternoon, after 2 hours of shared music, he at the adapted piano he had donated to the shelter, she on the flute, something unusual happened. Sophia has always been quiet, but I've never seen her as focused as she is during the afternoons she spends with you, commented Mary, who observed their interaction with growing admiration. At that moment, Sophia touched Anthony's arm in a way that was not part of the code they had established. She guided his hand to a small side table where she had placed something. "What is this?" Anthony asked, his fingers finding a cylindrical object. "A candle," Mary replied. "But this one is different. Sophia made it this morning in the art workshop. She refused to use conventional materials, insisting on mixing the waxes her own way." Anthony held the candle, feeling its peculiar texture. "She makes her own candles?" "Apparently, yes." The art teacher was impressed. She said Sophia seemed to know exactly what she was doing, as if she had done it her whole life. Carefully, Anthony brought the candle to his nose, smelling its aroma, an unusual combination of honey, cinnamon, and something deeper, almost earthy. "May I light it?" he asked. Mary nodded, searching for a lighter. When the flame ignited, Anthony's reaction was immediate and much more intense than in previous experiences. He gasped, recoiling in his chair, his hands visibly trembling. "Mr. Rivers, are you all right?" Mary asked, alarmed. I can see," he murmured, his voice trembling. Not just a blur, but shapes, contours. What Anthony experienced at that moment went beyond the simple perception of light he had had previously. The yellowish patch now had texture, depth. He could distinguish the outline of the flame, its dancing form, and, even more extraordinary, a vague silhouette beyond it, which he intuited to be Sophia's face. "Impossible," he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand towards what he perceived as the girl's image. His fingers touched her soft cheek. Tears streamed down his own face. Sophia, with a gesture of extreme delicacy, wiped one away. That night, upon returning home, Anthony was transformed. He immediately called Dr. Miller, reporting the experience. The doctor, initially skeptical, agreed to conduct new tests the next day, using the candle made by Sophia. "The question now," Anthony said to Paul as they entered the mansion, "is how to bring Sophia even closer to all of this. Supervised visits at the shelter aren't enough. Are you considering—" "Yes, I want to start the adoption process." Paul, who had served Anthony for over 15 years, rarely questioned him, but this time he felt compelled to do so. "Sir, with all due respect, these are very rapid changes. A few weeks ago, your life followed a pattern established for decades. Now you're considering adopting a child you barely know." "Paul, for the first time in 45 years, I was able to glimpse something beyond the darkness. And it happened because of her. I don't believe in coincidences of this magnitude." In the following days, Anthony immersed himself in two simultaneous fronts: the scientific investigation of his condition and the legal procedures to initiate Sophia's adoption process. At the hospital, tests with the handmade candle confirmed Anthony's account. When exposed to its flame, brain activation patterns were significantly more intense. Dr. Lucy, increasingly fascinated, suggested a radical approach. "We need to analyze the exact composition of this candle and perhaps create controlled variations to determine which specific element is causing this effect." "What if it's not the candle itself?" Anthony questioned. "What if it's who made it?" The doctor hesitated. "Are you suggesting the girl possesses some special ability?" "I'm suggesting that we're dealing with something that doesn't fit into our usual categories. Perhaps the connection isn't just physical, but something deeper." In the legal field, things proved more challenging. Upon consulting an attorney specializing in family law, Dr. Vanessa Carter, Anthony was confronted with the bureaucratic reality of the American adoption system. "Mr. Rivers, I need to be frank," Dr. Carter said in her office. "You're entering a complex process. You're single, have never had children, have a visual condition that many judges would consider limiting for raising a child, and your motivation arose very recently." "My visual impairment has never prevented me from building a business empire," Anthony argued. "Why would it prevent me from raising a child?" "I'm not saying it will prevent you, just that you'll face additional scrutiny. Furthermore, there's the fact that Sophia is a child with special needs, which makes the process even more rigorous." "What steps do I need to follow?" The attorney outlined the path. "First, register with the National Adoption System. Then, undergo psychological evaluations and home visits. Participate in preparatory courses. And finally, await the judicial decision. The entire process could take months, perhaps years." "I don't have that much time," Anthony murmured, more to himself than to the attorney. "Pardon?" "I mean, Sophia doesn't have that much time. Every day in the shelter is a lost day of a childhood that should be full." While the legal processes dragged on, Anthony intensified his presence at the shelter. He hired private tutors for Sophia, donated modern equipment to the institution, and began actively participating in daily activities, always under the watchful eye of Mary, who oscillated between gratitude for his generosity and caution regarding his intentions. On one of those afternoons, after a music therapy session, Anthony noticed a subtle change in Sophia's behavior. The girl, usually serene, seemed agitated, moving restlessly around the room. "What's wrong, Sophia?" he asked, extending his hand towards her. In response, she placed something in his palm, a small voice recorder like those used for memos. She pressed the play button. The recording contained only ambient sounds, nothing specific until in the last few seconds, a child's voice, almost inaudible, whispered, "Anthony." He froze, his heart racing. "Sophia, was that you who said my name?" The girl touched his hand twice, the code they had established for yes. Mary, who had been observing the scene from the doorway, quickly approached. "What happened?" "Sophia spoke," Anthony said, his voice choked. "She said my name." Incredulous, Mary asked to hear the recording. After listening to it 3 times, her eyes filled with tears. "In 3 years, we've never heard her voice, not even a murmur." That night, Anthony returned home with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, pure crystalline hope. Progress was slow but undeniable, both in his visual perception and in Sophia's development. Upon entering his office, he found Paul waiting with a grave expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately sensing something was amiss. "I received a call from Dr. Carter. It seems someone filed a formal complaint with Child Protective Services, questioning your frequent visits to Sophia and suggesting inappropriate motives." Anthony sat down slowly, the feeling of triumph giving way to concern. Who would do that? The attorney doesn't know, but she mentioned the complainant identified herself as a social worker, someone named Cecilia Dawson. I've never heard of this person. Apparently, she works for the Department of Social Services for the Family Court, and according to Dr. Carter, she's known for her exceptional rigor in adoption cases. Anthony took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. In a few weeks, his life had transformed in ways he could never have predicted. He was treading an unknown path, guided by the faint light a silent girl had lit in his darkness. "Paul," he finally said, "schedule a meeting with this Dr. Dawson for tomorrow. I want to understand exactly what I'm being accused." What Anthony couldn't imagine was that this would be just the first of many obstacles he would encounter on his journey to bring Sophia into his life and to understand the extraordinary phenomenon that united them. The Department of Social Services for the Family Court occupied an entire floor of an administrative building in Midtown Manhattan. Anthony, accompanied by his attorney, Dr. Vanessa Carter, sat in Dr. Cecilia Dawson's waiting room, awaiting his call. His fingers drummed on his cane, the only external sign of his anxiety. "Remember," Vanessa whispered, "stay calm no matter what's said. This woman is known for trying to provoke emotional reactions to assess the temperament of adoption candidates." The door opened and a female voice, meticulously controlled, announced, "Mr. Rivers, you may come in." Anthony stood up, orienting himself by the sound. Upon entering the room, he immediately perceived the austere environment. No ambient music, no aromas, just the discreet hum of an air conditioner. "I'm Cecilia Dawson, the social worker responsible for your case." The woman introduced herself without extending a hand. "Please sit down." 40 minutes of meticulous questioning followed. Cecilia inquired about his daily routine, his expectations regarding fatherhood, his understanding of Sophia's special needs, his plans for educating her. Each question was loaded with implicit skepticism. "Mr. Rivers, do you understand that raising a child with selective mutism requires specific knowledge and exclusive dedication? Would your CEO schedule allow for that?" "I've already reorganized my executive structure," Anthony replied, keeping his voice steady. "I've delegated several operational functions to focus on what truly matters." "And what about your visual condition? How do you intend to supervise a 9-year-old child?" Anthony smiled slightly. "Dr. Dawson, I manage 5,000 employees without seeing them. I've lived independently for decades. I've hired professionals specializing in inclusive education to adapt my residence. Furthermore, Sophia and I have developed our own communication that transcends vision." The social worker paused. The sound of her pen scratching paper was the only noise in the room. "You mentioned in your initial statement that you believe there's a special connection between you. Could you elaborate?" Here Anthony hesitated. How to explain the candle phenomenon without sounding irrational? How to describe the sensation of seeing shapes for the first time, precisely in her presence? "Sophia and I share a non-verbal language," he finally said. "She responds to my music. I respond to her presence. It's a connection I can't rationally explain, but one I feel deeply." Cecilia let out an almost imperceptible sigh. "Mr. Rivers, with all due respect, adoption decisions cannot be based on unexplained feelings. We need concrete evidence that you can offer a stable and suitable environment." The meeting ended with Cecilia announcing that she would make an unscheduled visit to Anthony's mansion in the coming days, and that she would need to personally observe his interaction with Sophia at the shelter. "I don't like that tone," Vanessa commented as they left the building. "She's already formed an opinion about you before even properly meeting you. What can we do? Let us follow the protocol strictly. Give no reason for questioning, and, if necessary, appeal to higher authorities." In the days that followed, Anthony immersed himself in preparations. He hired inclusive design specialists to further adapt his home, expanding accessibility for a child. He enrolled in intensive courses on child development and special needs. He organized a room for Sophia with musical instruments, braille books, and a special lighting system, designed based on discoveries about his sensitivity to certain types of light. Cecilia's visit to the mansion was as meticulous as expected. She inspected every room, questioned every adaptation, interviewed all the staff. Her expression remained unchangeable, but Anthony, sensitive to vocal nuances, perceived her persistent skepticism. "Impressive structure," she commented at the end, "but a house doesn't make a home." "Mr. Rivers." The following week came the observation at the shelter. Cecilia sat discreetly in a corner of the music room, observing the interaction between Anthony and Sophia for 2 hours. The girl, initially tense with the strange presence, soon relaxed beside Anthony, guiding his hands over the piano keyboard, presenting him with new candles she had created. In a particularly touching moment, Sophia placed a braided ring she had made with colorful threads on Anthony's fingers. "What is this, Sophia?" he asked, feeling the texture. The girl pressed his hand 3 times, the code for family. At the end of the session, when Sophia was called for a snack, Cecilia approached Anthony. "I recognize there's a bond between you," she said, her voice a little less rigid. "But I still have serious reservations. You have no experience with children. Your condition imposes obvious limitations, and your sudden decision to adopt raises questions about emotional stability. What else do I need to prove?" Anthony asked, controlling his frustration. "It's not about proving, Mr. Rivers. It's about ensuring the child's best interest is served." 2 weeks later, Cecilia's preliminary opinion arrived, unfavorable to the adoption. She recommended that Anthony continue as a regular visitor, but not as an adoptive parent, citing founded concerns about adequate supervision capacity and possibly idealistic and unrealistic motivations. The news was devastating. Anthony, usually controlled, allowed himself a moment of despair in his private office. To complicate matters further, doctors reported a plateau in his visual progress. Brain responses remained stable with no significant advancements. "We'll appeal," Vanessa stated, determined. "Her opinion isn't definitive. We have testimonies from Mary and the shelter professionals that contradict her conclusions." While preparing the appeal, Anthony continued to visit Sophia regularly. The girl intuitively seemed to sense his concern. On a rainy afternoon, while sharing a quiet moment in the shelter's library, she placed a drawing in his hands. "What did she draw?" Anthony asked Mary, who observed the scene with tenderness. "It's 3 people holding hands," the coordinator described. "A tall man, a small girl, and a woman. Everyone is smiling with a bright sun above." "A family," Anthony murmured, his throat tight. "Yes," Mary agreed. "You know, Mr. Rivers, in 3 years, I've never seen Sophia so connected with anyone as she is with you. Whatever Cecilia Dawson thinks, I've witnessed a real transformation in this child." That night, as Anthony returned home, his phone rang. It was Dr. Miller, with news about the studies. "We were analyzing the candles Sophia creates," the doctor explained, his voice animated. "There's something extraordinary in the composition. She mixes waxes in a way that produces a very specific luminous frequency, which exactly matches the activation frequency we detect in your brain." "How is that possible?" "She has no scientific training. She's just a child." "Precisely why it's so fascinating. It's as if she instinctively knows what your brain needs to process visual information." The conversation left Anthony even more determined. The next morning, he called Vanessa with a new strategy. "I want to request a special hearing with the judge. We'll present the medical reports, show the scientific connection between me and Sophia." "It's risky," the attorney warned. "Using scientific arguments that are not yet conclusive might make it seem like we're instrumentalizing the girl for your medical interests. So what do you suggest?" "Let's go the most direct route. Demonstrate how you both mutually benefit. You offer stability, resources, education. She brought purpose to your life." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, a new obstacle arose, a sensationalist report on a news portal, with the provocative title, "Blind Billionaire Tries to Adopt Girl Who Allegedly Cured His Blindness. Science or Exploitation?" The article, full of half-truths and speculations, suggested that Anthony was using Sophia as a guinea pig for experimental treatments. It cited anonymous sources who questioned his intentions and highlighted the market value of possible treatments for congenital blindness. "This has Cecilia's fingerprints all over it," Vanessa concluded after reading the report. "She can't disclose process information, but she can leak certain impressions." The effect was immediate. The shelter began to be harassed by reporters, and Mary, concerned about the children's well-being, was forced to restrict Anthony's visits. Sophia, sensitive to changes in the environment, became withdrawn again. She stopped playing the flute, refused to create new candles, and her drawings, once colorful, became monochromatic and somber. Anthony, in turn, noticed a regression in his visual perceptions. The shapes he was beginning to distinguish reverted to mere luminous blurs, even with the candles Sophia had created previously. The situation reached a critical point when, after a week without being able to visit Sophia, Anthony received a distressed call from Mary. "Mr. Rivers, I'm worried about Sophia. She hasn't been eating properly for days. She's not interacting with the other children. This morning we found her trying to escape the shelter. When we asked where she was going, she wrote your address on a piece of paper." The news broke Anthony's heart. He immediately contacted Vanessa to expedite the legal procedures. "We can't wait another 2 weeks for the hearing. This is affecting her health. I'll request an emergency measure," the attorney agreed, "based on the child's psychological well-being." 3 days later, a court officer arrived at Anthony's mansion with a notification. The judge had ordered an urgent psychological evaluation of Sophia and permitted daily supervised visits until the final hearing. When Anthony arrived at the shelter that afternoon, accompanied by Vanessa and a child psychologist appointed by the court, he found Sophia sitting alone in the garden, curled up in herself like a small cocoon. "Sophia," he called softly, kneeling beside her. "It's me." The reaction was immediate and intense. The girl threw herself into his arms, trembling with contained emotion. For the first time, Anthony felt tears wet his shirt. Sophia was crying, silently but crying. The psychologist, observing the scene, made detailed notes. After 2 hours of interaction and subtle tests, she called Vanessa and Mary for a private conversation, while Anthony remained with Sophia in the garden. "The connection between them is undeniable," the professional concluded. "And more importantly, it's beneficial for the child's emotional development. My recommendation will be for Mr. Rivers to receive temporary custody while the adoption process follows its normal course." The news, when it reached Anthony, brought such profound relief that he could barely express it in words. Sophia, sensing his emotion, placed her small hands on his face as if wanting to memorize him by touch. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Under the soft light of dusk, filtered by the leaves of the trees, Anthony perceived that he could distinguish, albeit very faintly, the outline of Sophia's face. It wasn't the same perception he had with the candles. It was something different, as if his brain was learning new ways to interpret light. "I can see you," he whispered, barely believing it. "Not clearly, but I can see your face," Sophia smiled. And then, to the astonishment of all present, she spoke her second word since arriving at the shelter 3 years earlier. "Father." Temporary custody was granted the following morning. As they prepared Sophia's move to the mansion, Cecilia Dawson appeared at the shelter, visibly displeased with the judicial decision. "This isn't over. Mr. Rivers," she warned in a low, almost threatening tone, "I still believe your motivations go beyond the child's well-being." Anthony, with Sophia holding his hand firmly, responded serenely. "Do you know the difference between us, Dr. Dawson? You look at me and see only a blind man trying to do something impossible. I look at Sophia, yes, in my own way, and I see infinite possibilities." As they left the shelter, Sophia carrying only a small backpack with her most precious belongings, her handmade candles, her flute, and her drawings, Anthony felt they were, finally, taking the first real step on a journey that was just beginning. What none of them could foresee, however, was that the greatest challenges and the most extraordinary discoveries were yet to come. Sophia's first weeks at the Rivers mansion were a period of mutual adaptation. Anthony, accustomed to meticulously organized solitude, now shared his space with a child whose silence was as eloquent as any word. The household staff, Paul, Denise, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Martha, quickly fell in love with the expressive-eyed girl who communicated mainly through gestures and drawings. "She has a special way of observing everything," Mrs. Martha commented, after finding Sophia carefully rearranging the decorative candles in the living room, positioning them to create specific patterns of light and shadow. For Anthony, each day brought new discoveries. His visual perception, though still extremely limited, showed gradual improvements. He could distinguish large contrasts, perceive movements, and, most significantly, identify Sophia by her silhouette when she was nearby. Candles continued to be essential catalysts for this phenomenon, especially those created by Sophia herself, who now had a small adapted studio in a sunny corner of the house. The most extraordinary development, however, was that of the girl herself. At home, away from the institutional gaze of the shelter, Sophia began to blossom. Her communication expanded, still predominantly non-verbal, but now occasionally punctuated by whispered words, always directed exclusively at Anthony. "Light," she said one morning, placing a new creation in his hands, a spiral-shaped candle with layers of colors that only he could appreciate in a unique way. "You see light differently, don't you?" Anthony asked, fascinated by the child's intuition about something as abstract as visual perception. Sophia responded by pressing his hand twice. "Yes." "And why do you think you can help me see?" The girl remained silent for a long moment, then whispered, "I always knew." This inexplicable connection was also the focus of the medical team that continued to study the case. Hospital visits became routine, with Sophia always accompanying him voluntarily, observing each exam, each scientific discussion with attentive eyes, as if she intuitively understood what the specialists were trying to decipher. "It's as if she has an innate knowledge of light frequencies and how they affect the brain," commented Dr. Lucy during a testing session. "The candles she creates have exactly the oscillation pattern that stimulates Anthony's residual visual areas. Perhaps we should investigate her history further," suggested Dr. Miller. "Is there something in her origin that could explain this unusual ability?" The suggestion stirred in Anthony an uneasiness he had been postponing confronting. Since starting the adoption process, he had focused on the present and future with Sophia, reluctant to dig into a past that might contain traumas. But the question persisted. Who was Sophia before the shelter? Where did this connection to light and this skill with candles come from? After consulting the child psychologist who was following the case, Anthony decided to approach the subject delicately. On a quiet afternoon, while Sophia played the flute in the mansion's winter garden, he joined her on the bench. "Sophia, do you remember where you came from?" "Before the shelter?" The music stopped abruptly. The tension in the air was palpable. "I don't want to pressure you," he continued gently, "but perhaps understanding your past will help us understand this special connection we have." To his surprise, Sophia took his hand and guided it to a sketchbook. She turned a few pages until she reached a sketch he had never seen before. Even with his sensitive fingers, he hadn't been able to fully decipher it. "What is it?" he asked. Sophia took his hand again and traced shapes on the paper. Anthony felt the outline of what appeared to be a small house, trees, and a river. Then the girl guided his fingers to 3 figures, a small one, presumably her, a taller female figure, and a very elderly one. "Your family?" he asked, his heart racing. 2 soft touches on his hand. "Yes." "Do you remember them?" 1 touch, a pause, and another touch, the code for a little. In the following weeks, with the careful assistance of the psychologist, Anthony helped Sophia express more memories. Through drawings, gestures, and occasional whispered words, a puzzle began to form. A house by a river, an artist mother, a grandmother who worked with handmade candles, an illness, a separation. With these fragmented clues, Anthony hired a discreet private investigator to try to locate Sophia's biological family. The process was delicate. Legally, Sophia had been declared abandoned after no one claimed her in the system for over 2 years. But Anthony felt that, for the girl's complete healing and development, the loose ends needed to be tied. After weeks of seemingly fruitless searches, the investigator finally brought a promising lead, a small artisans cooperative in Beacon, New York, specializing in handmade candles with traditional formulas passed down through generations. Among the artisans, a woman named Laura Martin, 31, who lived with her elderly mother, Helen. The most interesting thing, the investigator reported, is that this Laura was hospitalized for almost a year, about 3 years ago, with a severe neurological condition. When she regained consciousness, she discovered that her 6-year-old daughter had disappeared. Disappeared how? Anthony asked, tense. Apparently, the grandmother, already quite elderly, was responsible for the child during the mother's hospitalization. In a moment of confusion, she lost the girl during a trip to Midtown Manhattan. Official searches were closed after months without results. Anthony felt a chill run down his spine. The temporal proximity, the location, the handmade candles, everything pointed to a connection with Sophia. "Are there photographs?" he asked. "Yes, I managed to get some, and there's a striking resemblance to Sophia." Confirmation came through DNA tests, performed discreetly with a hairbrush of Sophia's, and voluntary samples from Laura, who was contacted under the pretext of research into traditional artisanal techniques. The result was unequivocal, 99.9% probability of direct kinship. Anthony now faced a profound moral dilemma. He had promised himself never to lie to Sophia, cultivating a relationship based on absolute trust. But how to approach this discovery? How to tell the girl that her biological mother had not intentionally abandoned her, that she might still suffer from her absence? After long consultations with the psychologist and Dr. Carter, he decided that the truth, presented with sensitivity, was the only possible path. On a Saturday afternoon, as they created a new musical composition together at the piano, Anthony took a deep breath. "Sophia, remember when we talked about your family from before, about your mother and grandmother?" The girl stopped playing, attentive. "I believe we found them." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with complex emotions. Sophia remained motionless for so long that Anthony began to fear he had made a mistake. Then he felt small fingers intertwine with his. "Did they?" "Look for me," Sophia whispered, her voice so fragile it almost got lost in the air. The question hit Anthony like a dagger. "Yes," he replied, his voice choked. "Your mother became very ill. She was sleeping in a hospital for a long time. When she woke up, you had gotten lost. They looked for you very much." Silent tears streamed down Sophia's face. Anthony could feel them when the girl rested her head on his chest. "Would you like to meet them?" he asked softly. Sophia did not answer immediately. When she finally did, it was not with gestures or whispers, but with a clear, carefully articulated question. "Are you going to send me away?" Anthony felt his heart break and mend in the same instant. "Never," he replied firmly. "I will never let you go unless it's what you want. We are together now, we are family. But they are too." "Yes," he agreed. "And perhaps we can find a way for us all to be a family, in a new way." In the following weeks, Anthony and the psychological team carefully prepared the meeting. Laura and Mrs. Helen were gradually informed about Sophia, including her condition of selective mutism and her current life. They were presented with medical and psychological reports documenting the girl's well-being, and finally with recent photos. The meeting was scheduled for a sunny Sunday in the mansion's garden. Anthony, more nervous than he had rarely been in his life, waited beside Sophia, who held his hand firmly, while the other played with the silver necklace he had given her for her birthday, a delicate flame-shaped pendant. When the car arrived, bringing Laura and Mrs. Helen, Anthony felt Sophia stiffen beside him. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm here with you." The moment Laura saw Sophia was of an almost physical intensity. A sob escaped the woman, who stopped a few feet away as if fearing her daughter might disappear if she approached too closely. "Sophia?" she called, her voice trembling. The girl did not move initially. Then slowly, she let go of Anthony's hand and took a hesitant step towards the voice. Another step. One more. Laura knelt, opening her arms without touching her daughter, respecting her space. "My little one," she murmured. "I thought I'd never see you again." Sophia extended her hand, hesitantly touching Laura's face as if to confirm it was real. Then, in a movement that surprised everyone, She turned and gestured for Anthony to come closer. When he reached her side, Sophia took his hand and Laura's joining them. "Family," she said, this time in a clear, audible voice. Mrs. Helen, who watched the scene with tear-filled eyes, finally approached. Anthony immediately noticed the scent, the same aroma of honey and spices that Sophia incorporated into her candles. "She always had the gift," the elderly woman commented, referring to Sophia. "Since she was a baby, she understood candles in a way even I didn't fully comprehend." "Gift?" Anthony asked. "In our family, we've worked with light for 7 generations. Not just ordinary candles, but special compositions that affect the senses, the mind. Some to calm, others to energize, others to heal." The afternoon passed in a mixture of emotions, tentative reconnections, shared stories, tears, and eventually smiles. Sophia, initially reserved, gradually relaxed, allowing Laura to hug her and Mrs. Helen to show her old tricks of molding wax between her fingers. The most extraordinary thing, however, happened when Sophia took the 2 women to her studio. Laura gasped upon seeing her daughter's creations, candles with complex patterns of colors and textures that she herself had never been able to create. "How did you learn this?" she asked, amazed. Sophia pointed to her own head. Then she took Anthony's hand and placed it on one of the candles. "For him to see," she explained simply. At that moment, all the pieces fell into place. Sophia was not just a child with an unusual ability. She was the heiress of ancestral knowledge, capable of manipulating light in ways that modern science was only beginning to understand. When Laura and Mrs. Helen finally said goodbye, they did so with the promise to return the next day. Anthony, sensing Sophia's emotional exhaustion, accompanied her to her room. "Are you all right?" he asked gently as he tucked her in. Sophia nodded but held his hand firmly when he made to get up. "Stay," she asked. Anthony sat on the edge of the bed. "What did you think of meeting your mother and grandmother?" "I remembered more things," Sophia replied, her voice still low but more fluid than ever. "The river, the candles, the smell of the house. Are they good memories?" "Yes," she paused. "But it's good here too." "Sophia," Anthony said seriously, "I want you to know that you don't have to choose. We can find a way for you to have both families in your life." The girl remained silent for a long moment. Then, to Anthony's surprise, she responded with a complete and clear sentence. "I already knew I was going to find you one day." Before he could fully process this enigmatic statement, Sophia continued, "Grandma always said that light knows how to find those who need it." The following months brought profound transformations for everyone involved. The integration of Sophia's 2 families, biological and adoptive, flowed with a naturalness that surprised even the psychologists accompanying the case. Laura Martin, recovered from the neurological illness that had almost cost her life, rented a small house on the outskirts of Greenwich Village, near Anthony's mansion. With a background in visual arts interrupted by early motherhood and then by illness, she now resumed her career, stimulated by the reunion with her daughter and Anthony's unexpected support. Mrs. Helen, at 78 years old and with ancestral knowledge of handmade candles, became a constant presence in the mansion. Her relationship with Anthony evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared admiration for Sophia. "Our family has worked with light for generations," she explained one afternoon, while teaching Sophia new molding methods in the studio. "It started with my great-great-grandmother, who was considered a healer in a small village in the Appalachian Mountains. She discovered that certain combinations of waxes, oils, and herbs produced flames with specific effects on mood, sleep, even physical pain. And this was passed down from mother to daughter." Anthony asked, fascinated by the story. "Yes, mainly through the women of the family. Each generation added its knowledge. My daughter, Beatrice, Laura's mother, experimented with combinations of crystals and resins. I worked with flame oscillation frequencies. Laura incorporated modern coloring and molding techniques. And Sophia?" Mrs. Helen smiled, observing her granddaughter work with absolute concentration on a new creation. "Sophia has a gift that even I don't fully comprehend. She seems to see light differently, to feel its vibrations on an almost quantum level." The word was not casual. The scientific studies on Anthony's visual phenomenon had evolved into an interdisciplinary field, that united neurology, quantum physics, and perceptual psychology. The case, rigorously documented academically by Dr. Miller's team, had attracted the attention of international researchers. "We are witnessing something unprecedented in medical literature," the neuroscientist stated during a private meeting. "The candles created by Sophia generate a pattern of luminous oscillation that somehow manages to activate residual neuronal circuits in Anthony's visual cortex. But the most extraordinary thing is that this activation is increasing, creating new synaptic connections. Does this mean my vision can continue to improve?" Anthony asked, trying to control his expectations. "We cannot promise normal vision," the doctor replied honestly, "but what we observe challenges our notions of brain plasticity and neuronal regeneration. Your brain is literally learning to see in a new way." Progress was gradual but consistent. Anthony now distinguished shapes with greater definition, recognized familiar faces at short distances, and perceived color variations when the lighting was favorable. His independence, already notable before, expanded into new territories. In parallel, Sophia flourished. The mutism that had isolated her for years gave way to increasingly fluid communication, though still selective. With Anthony, she conversed almost normally. With Laura and Mrs. Helen, she used short, clear sentences. With others, she still preferred gestures and expressions, but no longer completely withdrew. The final adoption hearing was approaching, now with a different configuration than initially planned. After long conversations mediated by psychologists and lawyers, Anthony and Laura reached an unusual agreement. They would request shared custody of Sophia, with Anthony maintaining legal adoption and Laura partially recovering her maternal rights. "It's what's best for her," Laura agreed, without resentment. "Sophia has formed a deep bond with you, Anthony. I would be selfish to try to undo that." "And you are her mother," he replied with equal generosity. "Sophia deserves to have your presence and feminine guidance, especially as adolescence approaches." Cecilia Dawson, the social worker, who had initially opposed the adoption so strongly, was assigned to evaluate the new arrangement. Her visit to the mansion, where she found Sophia surrounded by 3 adults who clearly adored her and supported her development, brought about a visible change in her demeanor. "I must acknowledge that I underestimated your capacity, Mr. Rivers," she admitted with reluctant respect. "And more importantly, I underestimated the resilience and specific needs of this child." When the day of the final hearing finally arrived, the judge, impressed by the psychological reports, Sophia's documented progress, and the maturity shown by the adults involved, approved the shared custody arrangement. "In 15 years in family court, I have rarely witnessed a case where a child's well-being was so clearly the priority of everyone involved," he commented, before officially signing the documents. As they left the courthouse, Sophia walked between Anthony and Laura, holding both their hands. In the car that awaited them, Mrs. Helen smiled with tear-filled eyes. A family rebuilt in ways none of them could have predicted. At the intimate celebration that followed, at the Rivers mansion, Anthony surprised everyone with an announcement. "In recent months, I have directed a significant portion of the Foundation's resources towards research into neuroplasticity and visual rehabilitation. Inspired by what we have experienced, I want to create a specialized center that unites modern science and traditional knowledge to help people with sensory disabilities." Laura, who had recently been invited to coordinate the art therapy area of the Foundation, added, "The center already has a name, Inner Light Institute. It will be a space where art, science and healing will meet." Mrs. Helen, emotional, added, "And our traditional knowledge about the power of light will be preserved and studied with the respect it deserves." Sophia, who had been listening attentively, stood up and, to everyone's surprise, walked to the center of the room. Her voice, once a reluctant whisper, now sounded clear and confident. "I will teach other children how to make candles, so that more people can see with their hearts like Anthony learned." The declaration, coming from a child who less than a year ago barely uttered isolated words, moved everyone. Anthony, especially, felt the weight of that extraordinary journey. From complete darkness to partial perception of light, from self-imposed solitude to this improbable and loving family. 6 months later, The Inner Light Institute was inaugurated in a restored townhouse in Brooklyn Heights. The space, designed to be completely accessible, featured wings dedicated to different therapeutic modalities: music therapy, art therapy, sensory stimulation, and, of course, the pioneering light therapy program developed from the discoveries made with Anthony. The project quickly gained national and international recognition, attracting people with various conditions, from children with autism, who responded positively to controlled patterns of visual stimulation, to elderly people with neurological degenerations, who found relief in integrated therapies. Laura coordinated the team of art therapists. Mrs. Helen trained young artisans in traditional techniques of creating therapeutic candles, and Sophia, now 10 years old and surprisingly articulate when the subject interested her, had become a kind of mascot for the Institute, demonstrating to visitors how small flames could illuminate inner worlds. Anthony, in turn, had found a new purpose that transcended the businesses he had built. Although he continued to lead his business empire, he dedicated more and more time to the Institute, bridging the corporate world and humanitarian work. His story, once private, had become a source of inspiration for many. On one particularly significant afternoon, while accompanying a group of investors through the Institute, Anthony experienced something extraordinary. Upon entering the studio where Sophia was conducting a therapeutic candle workshop with children with different disabilities, his visual perception, usually limited to basic shapes and pronounced contrasts, suddenly expanded. For a fleeting but intensely real moment, he saw with unprecedented clarity Sophia's radiant smile, the attentive faces of the children, the vibrant colors of the candles in the making. The sharpness lasted only a few seconds before receding to his usual pattern of diffuse perception, but it was enough to engrave in his memory an image he would carry forever. That night, while Sophia played a new composition on the flute, accompanied by Laura on the guitar, Anthony shared the experience with Mrs. Helen, who listened with a comprehending smile. "Light has its own paths," the elderly woman said, with the wisdom of someone who had spent her life studying its mysteries. "And it chooses its moments to reveal itself." "Do you think it will happen again?" he asked. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But does that matter so much? You already see much more than you perceive with your eyes." The observation, seemingly paradoxical, made profound sense to Anthony. His journey had never been just about regaining some measure of physical vision, but about learning to perceive the world and people in ways that transcended conventional senses. Sophia, noticing the conversation, interrupted her music to join them. "I saw you today," Anthony commented, stroking her hair. "For a moment, I saw your face with a clarity I've never experienced before." The girl smiled, showing no surprise. "I knew it would happen," she replied simply. "I was making a special candle thinking of you." "And how did you know it would work?" Sophia reflected for a moment, searching for words to express something that, for her, was intuitive. "Some people see with their eyes. Others, like you, learn to see with their hearts. But we all need light, the one that comes from outside and the one we create within ourselves." Laura, who had approached silently, commented with contained emotion, "Where does so much wisdom come from, my daughter?" Sophia shrugged, with the innocence characteristic of childhood, mixed with an understanding that seemed to transcend her age. "The candles teach me. Light speaks, if you know how to listen." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Anthony remained in his office, contemplating the extraordinary trajectory of the past months. From self-imposed solitude to the improvised family that now surrounded him, from complete darkness to the islands of clarity he occasionally experienced, from existential emptiness to the profound purpose that moved him. On his desk, a candle created by Sophia, his first vision candle, as they called it, burned softly. For the 1,000th time, Anthony marveled at the fact that he could perceive its flame. However imperfectly, light speaks, if you know how to listen, he repeated Sophia's words. And he was, finally, learning the language of light, not just the one that allowed some physical vision, but the metaphorical light that illuminated paths, connected people, revealed truths previously invisible. A year after the inauguration of the Inner Light Institute, Anthony and Sophia's story was documented in an international scientific publication, challenging paradigms about neuroplasticity and sensory rehabilitation. Researchers from various countries visited the institute, studying the phenomenon that was beginning to be replicated with variations in other patients. More important than scientific recognition, however, was the transformation in the lives the institute touched. Children who didn't communicate began to interact through light therapy. Adults with degenerative conditions found relief and new avenues of perception. Families reconnected through shared sensory experiences. At the Institute's first anniversary celebration, with the grand hall illuminated by hundreds of therapeutic candles created by the artisans trained by Mrs. Helen and Sophia, Anthony was invited to give a speech. Standing with Sophia by his side and Laura and Mrs. Helen nearby, he dispensed with his prepared notes and spoke from the heart. For 45 years, I lived in a world without physical light, but also I now realize in a world with little emotional light. I built walls around myself, convinced that my condition defined and limited me. It took a small flame, brought by an extraordinary child, to illuminate not just my eyes but my soul. He paused, emotional, before continuing. What we learn here at this institute transcends conventional science or medicine. We learn that light exists in many forms, physical, emotional, spiritual, that we can be sources of light for each other, that the limitations we believe we have are often just shadows projected by our own fears. Sophia, now more comfortable in public situations, added her own voice to the event. Everyone has light inside them, she said, her clear voice reaching all corners of the hall. Sometimes we just need someone to help us find it. As emotional applause filled the room, Anthony again experienced that momentary expansion of visual perception, a flash of clarity that allowed him to see, for a precious instant, the smiling faces around him. The vision soon receded to its usual state of limited perception, but the memory of that moment of clarity would remain. Later, at home, when the celebration was over and the mansion was silent, Anthony sat in the winter garden with Sophia. The girl, sleepy but reluctant to end that special day, rested her head on his shoulder. "You changed my life, you know," he said, kissing the top of her head. Sophia yawned before replying, "You changed mine too. We were meant to meet. How can you be so sure?" The girl was silent for a moment, as if searching for words to express a truth she felt intuitively. "Grandma says light always finds a way, even in the deepest darkness. I just helped the light find you." That night, as Sophia slept in her room decorated with glowing star mobiles, Anthony gazed at the night sky through the skylight. The stars, which for all his life had been just abstract concepts, now manifested as diffuse luminous points, imperfect, but real in his perception. He then realized that the true journey had never been about regaining vision in the conventional sense. It was about learning to see beyond apparent limitations, about finding light where he once perceived only darkness, about building bridges where chasms once existed. Sophia had taught him that the most important light is not the one that enters through the eyes, but the one that is born within the heart and illuminates the path for others. And that light, once lit, never completely fades. Even on the darkest nights, it continues to shine like a beacon, guiding not only those who carry it, but everyone around them. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Anthony and Sophia's journey has also brightened your day. For more heartwarming stories that make us reflect on life's true miracles, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. If this narrative touched your heart, show it with a like. Every reaction motivates us to continue sharing inspiring and transformative stories. And you, have you ever experienced a moment when an unexpected light changed your perception of the world? Tell us in the comments. We've prepared a special playlist with other stories about inexplicable connections and bonds that transcend the visible. Find the link in the description. Until the next story.